It might actually be the most derivative one of all. I mean, Christ, the same house.
Maybe so. But you forgot the first rule of surviving a stab movie. Never answer the...
I'm bored.
Wait!
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking I've Written a Letter to Daddy. We're talking Hagsploitation. And we're talking You Mean All This Time We Could Have Been Friends? And I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we're talking advertisements.
Oh my god. Some of the affectations in this movie are a little wild.
I think it's just like old school. I think that's just like proper pronunciation, and Joan Crawford was not going to be a low-class citizen saying advertisements.
This is fair. Yeah, she was a high-class dame.
Everyone, we are discussing, finally, Robert Aldrich's 1962 classic, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? And hoo boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Also, I love that you say finally. Like, you could do that with every movie we cover.
Well, I feel like this is like a really important part in queer cinema, not because it's explicitly queer. It's just like the fan base, the cult fandom that this movie has amassed is so queer.
That is very fair. Yeah.
Thanks in no small part to these grand dames that are leading it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
But okay, so before we get really into this, let's bring in our guest who's waiting in the wings. So, everyone, he is a horror writer and director that pulls triple duty, hosting YouTube series Evil Live, in which he talks everything horror with the people passionate about it the most. Please welcome Tyrone Williams.
Thank you guys for having me on. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, especially with this movie. I love this movie.
Well, okay, so you picked this movie to come on, and I'm dying to know, Tyrone, why do you love this movie so much, and what is your connection? Is there any special connection you have with it?
You know what it is? I've always heard the phrase, like I didn't see the movie until last year, but I've always heard the phrase, like, what happened to Baby Jane? Right. And my fiance, she was like, oh, me and my mom, we recommend you watch this movie. And it was just like a Sunday, just chilling out, you know, on the bed, and I just cut it on, and it was just like complete chaos to me, and just it was a lot going on, and I felt all the emotions in one. You know, I felt all the emotions in one movie. So it was like after that viewing, you know, I fell in love with it. I had to get it on DVD, you know, so I do own it. So
I think that's how it was. So, you know, I remember my dad talking about this movie because I think it probably played on Turner Classic Movies or something. And
oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
He would have been 4 when this came out. So he probably grew up watching this on TV as well. But I remember even thinking as a kid, I was like, you know, I mean, this is considered a B movie, a horror film. I actually find this film supremely sad. Like, this is a tragedy, first and foremost, to me. And I just get so sad every time I watch it, while also delighting in the unhinged performance of one Bette Davis.
Yes.
Yeah, it's catty and bitchy, but also there's this undertone of moroseness to it.
Yeah, much like the real life story going on behind the scenes. And Joe, this was your first time seeing this movie, was it not?
It was, but, you know, all you had to do is start researching this film a little bit, and you realize this is so canonically queer that I felt like I had already consumed huge portions of it just by sheer virtue of having read sites, had conversations with other queer people, specifically gay men. I feel like this is a very, like, gay male canonical film.
I would agree with that. And again, I think it is because of the fandom that both Bette Davis and Joan Crawford have amassed in the century since they started working in the business. But, okay, well, before we go into the movie itself, let's discuss these two female powerhouses at its center. And everyone, we're going to do a primer on these before we get into the actual feud that everyone is so familiar with.
Ooh, I see what you did there.
I know. Wait, I'm sorry. Have either one of you watched Feud, Bette and Joan?
I'm definitely going to watch it after this podcast because I know this is going to get me hyped for it.
Oh, it's a good time. I didn't finish it. I got to the Oscar episode.
Oof.
Ryan Murphy and I have a contentious relationship, as some listeners will know, but it is exceptionally well done. And yeah, Jessica Lange and Susan Sarandon are quite good in it.
So good. That actually works out, Joe, because we're going to go up to the Oscars for this movie and not really go beyond that. So
It's like I did homework.
I know, right? But I will say, so a lot of this information is coming from two things. One is a documentary called Bette and Joan Blind Ambition that is on the Blu-ray and DVD release for this film. And the other is going to be from the book, Bette and Joan, The Divine Feud by Shaun Considine. And this is... So I have seen all of Feud, and I will say, it's really good. It's fucking fantastic. But I was always kind of like, okay, but we're adapting real life. Like, how much embellishing is Ryan Murphy doing in this story?
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot. The series is painfully accurate. This book was in the works for 14 years as Mr. Considine talked to both Davis and Crawford before their respective deaths and spent over a decade interviewing people in Hollywood, crew members, family members, all about this shit. And so it is wild, the stuff he pulled out.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. So first, Joan Crawford, in case you don't know who she is, she got her start as a chorus girl in various silent films and musicals, but it wasn't until 1928's Our Dancing Daughters that her career was launched, and the entire world was fascinated by her, and the film was a success, so she started getting more and more roles as a relatable rags-to-riches type character, eventually signing a long-term contract with MGM, who increased her salary considerably. Bette Davis, however, came from the theater and was a wonderful success in an early show called Broken Dishes, where she played a shrewish wife. And this would be a type of role, not necessarily a shrewish wife, but like an unlikable character, I guess. This was kind of the role that she pigeonholed herself into. A talent scout from Universal Pictures noticed her and brought her over to Hollywood. They signed her a contract, and even though Carl Laemmle, the head of Universal Pictures at the time, didn't see what the big deal was, referring to her as the Little Brown Wren, which was a nickname that caught on.
Oh my God.
Yes. Others noticed her because of her very distinctive and large eyes.
Right.
Hence the song Bette Davis Eyes. Ultimately, though, after 1 year and 6 unsuccessful films, Laemmle elected not to renew her contract. So she's literally on her way back to New York to be like, well, tried Hollywood, didn't work, we're going to go.
Big mistake. Huge.
Enter actor George Arliss, who was a major figure on the screen at the time, and decided that she would be right for his next vehicle, 1932's Warner Brothers picture, The Man Who Played God. This film was a huge success, especially for Davis, and it got her a 5-year contract with Warner Brothers. And remember, everyone, we're in that system, the studio system, where all these actors are contracted to studios. They have to do a certain number of films a year, and if they wanted to work for another studio, they had to be loaned out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's called human chattel.
Pretty much, yes. Jack Warner, though, the head of Warner Brothers at the time, did not really know how to market women. Shocker.
Oh, so nothing has changed, is what you're saying.
Basically. I mean, he only saw them as pretty faces. So before Davis, Warner had never had a top female star that was groomed by them. So she took the bull by the horns and fought for and marketed herself. She was not to be a docile lady following the boss's orders. Now, by the time Davis started breaking out in the mid-30s, Crawford was already an established star in film over at MGM. She and Clark Gable had made several pictures together, but it was 1932's Grand Hotel, one of the first all-star films ever made in Hollywood, that really showed everybody that they were putting Crawford on the same level as the Barrymores, Greta Garbos, etc. Off camera, she played the star 24/7, was always dressed to the nines, even if she was just going to the convenience store. Because, in her words, if you wanted to see the girl next door, why don't you just go next door?
I also love how both women give great sound bites.
Okay, I have not read this entire Feud book, but I'm going to tell you right now that some of the bitchy one-liners these women say, not just to each other, but about the world and people in general, is delightfully entertaining, and it is no surprise that the gay male culture has adopted them as icons.
Right.
So Davis, meanwhile, was getting a lot of ingenue roles, and she was tired of it. So along comes John Cromwell's 1934 adaptation of Human Bondage, which was being made over at RKO. Davis really wanted to play the role of Mildred Rogers, and this role is really important because it's essentially the first quote-unquote bitch heroine ever put on film. none of the name actresses at RKO wanted to play the role because of that aforementioned bitch factor, so Davis went after it. Since this would have required a loan out to RKO, she goes to Jack Warner, kicking, pleading, and screaming until he finally says, "Okay, Betty, go hang yourself."
Jesus.
So she did. And that role got her an Academy Award nomination.
Bam.
But not a win. She did eventually win the Best Actress Oscar the following year for the 1935 film Dangerous, and got a second Best Actress Oscar for the 1938 film Jezebel. It was at this point that Warner Brothers truly started creating women's pictures for her with big budgets, and she was notorious for fighting for the role she wanted, for leaving the studio on strike if she didn't get her way, and for turning down the roles she didn't want. So, by the end of the 30s, she was tops and essentially the queen of the Warner Brothers lot.
Nice. Good for her.
Crawford, by comparison. So in 1935, she wanted to change her shopgirl image and tried the roles that Bette Davis was doing. However, it didn't work for her because fans were so used to seeing her in that rags to riches formula, they didn't want to see her at all unsympathetic or playing too strong a woman.
Which is wild because that's the only roles I know Joan Crawford for.
Right? So go pre The Women and look at those roles. Those are going to be her rags to riches girl next door type roles. So even though Crawford remained a respected MGM actress and her films still earned profits, her popularity declined in the late 1930s. So in 1937, she was proclaimed the first queen of the movies by Life magazine, but she unexpectedly slipped from 7th to 16th place at the box office that year, and her public popularity began to wane, to the point where she was even deemed box office poison.
Poison, yeah.
In 1938, along with, though, Greta Garbo, Norma Shearer, Fred Astaire, and Katharine Hepburn.
I think they even took out an ad in either Variety or The Hollywood Reporter, like literally naming those people and saying box office poison. It was just a different time.
Yes, you're 100% correct. It was a letter, an open letter written to the Independent Film Journal. And so they weren't saying they were bad actors or actresses. What they were saying was that while they had unquestioned dramatic abilities, their high salaries did not reflect in their ticket sales, thus hurting the movie exhibitors involved.
Rare.
So enter The Women. Crawford heard about George Cukor's 1939 adaptation of the play The Women being made, and in an uncharacteristic turn, went for the part of Crystal, the film's villain. She's the mistress of the film.
Right, okay.
Taking a supporting role, also in the remake of The Women, which is not good, that's the Eva Mendes character.
Ooh, boy, yeah, we don't talk about the remake. Folks, if you have not seen the original, though, huge recommend. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. So taking a supporting role in what was a top-line Nora Shearer picture was quite a move for her, and the risk paid off. She virtually stole the film, playing the bad girl, and that got her to realize that playing that type of role, which Bette Davis had been doing for years, got her way more attention than playing the good girl. And from then on, her image began to harden. So this is a big comeback for her. And it worked for the next 3 to 4 years until in 1943, she was let out of her MGM contract. Because she was also not famous again. Like, people were just like losing interest in her. So Jack Warner, opportunist that he was, saw a hot commodity available on the open market and signed Crawford for a contract at 1/3 her MGM salary.
Boo.
But she took it because who else was going to pick her up?
Yeah.
Now, Crawford knew Bette Davis to be the queen of the lot, which meant she got first pick of all the properties that went through Warner Brothers. Davis was offered the title role in Michael Curtis's 1945 film adaptation of Mildred Pierce, but she refused it.
Oh, again, big mistake. Huge.
Yeah, huge. Because as we'll come to learn, Bette Davis's goal after this point in her career was to be the first person to win 3 Oscars. And so, as she was wont to learn, she could have won her 3rd Oscar by playing Mildred Pierce because Crawford took the role and did win an Oscar for playing Mildred Pierce.
Oh, man, that movie, fucking iconic. It's so good.
You know, I've only seen the miniseries with Kate Winslet that I want to say Todd Haynes did.
He did. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I have not seen the original film.
It's amazing.
So, this is actually believed to be the beginning of the rift, or the feud, between Bette and Joan. Because while Davis's Warner Brothers career was winding down in the late 40s, Crawford's was now taking off. Which is funny, considering Crawford got her start in the business before Davis did. Davis asked out of her Warner Brothers contract in 1949 during the filming of Beyond the Forest because she didn't want the film on her resume. And she said, you know what? I'll finish it if I can get out of my contract. And they said, you know what? Fine. Fuck off. And she did. So as I said before, though, Davis won 2 Oscars prior, and she really wanted that third one. She was nominated 5 more times after her 1938 win and before she left Warner. But enter 1950's All About Eve, which earned her her 9th Oscar nomination and was her first big comeback, the second being Baby Jane.
Right.
Everyone thought she was going to win her 3rd Oscar for that role, but she was also up against another big comeback, Gloria Swanson's first notable film since the silent era, Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah. Oh my God. What a fucking year.
1950, man. It is fucking wild. So she loses and goes off to marry her 4th husband, Gary Merrill, that same year, and spent most of the 50s living in Maine, raising her family, while starring in a few less than notable films. So after All About Eve, like, her career is pretty much, like, her film career at least, is pretty much kind of done.
Right.
Crawford worked more steadily than Davis in the 50s, but she asked to be released from her Warner Brothers contract in 1952 after the completion of the film This Woman is Dangerous, a film she called her worst. And she could tell that Warner was losing interest. She was getting shitty script, shitty director, shitty leading men, she said. So rather than just wait for them to kick her out, she said, nope, I'm going to go, I'm going to leave. And rather than make her do her last feature, they just paid her $100,000.
Right. Nice.
Yeah. So, okay. But later that year, she did receive her 3rd and final Academy Award nomination for RKO's Sudden Fear. And after that, okay, this is kind of an anecdote, but kind of funny because Pepsi-Cola plays a big part in the feud between these two women.
Yep.
She married Alfred Steele, her 4th and final husband, in 1955. And Steele was also the president of Pepsi-Cola at the time. So she traveled extensively on behalf of the brand following the marriage. Well, he died of a heart attack in 59, and after his death, Crawford was elected to the board of directors, which took up more of her time and also meant that anywhere she went, she was pimping out Pepsi-Cola.
I fucking love it. Just the idea of someone like Joan Crawford shilling for Pepsi, being like, I own 98% of this company.
And Tyrone, the big joke here, too, is that she had a Pepsi machine installed on the set of Baby Jane. And I don't know if it's either that Bette Davis brought in more Coke or she installed a Coke machine next to it.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah. But nevertheless, all of this did not erase the fact that both Davis and Crawford were in a black period, essentially being iced out of an extremely sexist industry. So, enter Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Director Robert Aldrich had originally bought the project, an adaptation of Henry Farrell's 1960 novel of the same name, and approached Crawford, who had been bugging him since she starred in his 1955 film Autumn Leaves, to get her another project to work on. When he showed her this script, she said, well, if I'm going to do this, we need someone like Bette Davis to play one of the sisters. And Aldrich was like, holy fuck, like this would be great because the publicity I can make off of their well-known rivalry, which it is interesting to me in like the 60s that this was such a well-known rivalry already. I mean, we have had a Hopper the Gossip Columnist and they're all doing their shit, but it also feels like, like a Hollywood bubble. But apparently everyone around the country knew about this thing.
Well, I mean, you reference Hedda Hopper, who is a notable gossip columnist, but she was syndicated. So, you were getting Hollywood, like inside Hollywood juicy gossip stories that were available to people in rinky-dink towns in the middle of nowhere.
Well, there you go. Well, it did work out, but we'll get to the box office in a minute. So the deal was struck because Davis agreed as soon as she learned she was going to be playing the title role. And the deal was that Davis would receive $60,000 in salary plus 10% of the worldwide net profits. Crawford would receive less money up front, $30,000, so half of Davis's salary, but she would get 15% of the net profits.
Ooh, it's a risky bet, but when it works, it pays off.
Mm-hmm. And Davis, though, was also getting more money per week in living expenses, which Crawford noticed when she was accidentally handed Davis's contract.
Ooh.
Oh, no.
So they rectified that quote-unquote mistake immediately.
Yeah, was she accidentally handed it by, like, Bette Davis's assistant? Like,
well, because they did a public signing of the contract. And I guess they're all sitting at the table with all the press around them taking pictures, and that's when it happened.
Oh, shit.
Davis, though, knew that Crawford had a habit of developing a quote-unquote meaningful relationship with her directors. So she flat out asked Robert Aldrich if he fucked Crawford, and he said no. But he did say that Crawford tried to seduce him on the set of 1955's Autumn Leaves.
Wow.
Everybody's so candid.
That's what I'm saying. It's wild. It's so wild.
All I'm saying is I wish that Halle Berry would really give us the dirt on Bryan Singer, because that's like the number one feud in contemporary movie history, where I'm just like, I want the details. What actually happened? If this was back in the 60s, everybody would be spilling the tea.
Well, it's also like they're kids, too. We'll talk about Bette Davis's kid, but, both Joan Crawford's and Bette Davis's children wrote tell-all books about their lives, and we all know Mommy Dearest, but I feel like B.D. Merrill's Davis's daughter's book is less well-known, but that one is called My Mother's Keeper, and Bette Davis disinherited her after reading that and never spoke to her again. She's also in this movie, and we'll point her out. Distributors everywhere, though, turned this movie down. And Jack Warner didn't like Baby Jane because he thought bringing these two women together was a mistake. And this is a direct quote from him. "I wouldn't give you one dime for those two washed-up old bitches."
Damn.
Yep. And so bursts an entire subgenre that thrives throughout the 60s, hagsploitation, where it's basically like, oh, we can make money off of these older actresses that we have essentially kicked to the curb.
Well, and the thing with that is, there are critics about it again because it's exploitation. We're exploiting these older, quote-unquote, washed-up actresses. But at the same time, it's giving them jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And there's an audience for it if done properly.
So Aldrich saw the publicity advantage of bringing together these famed women with a big public rivalry. Warner finally agreed to distribute it if it could be done on a very low budget. For Davis and Crawford, the movie would either put the final nail in the coffins of their careers — this was, after all, a B-movie horror film — or it would rejuvenate both of them. They had to take the risk, though, as these were starring roles, and neither had been offered one in years.
Right.
So filming takes place over a 6-week period in Los Angeles in the summer of 1962, and both stars were assured approval on, here's the thing, approval on costumes, which I get, makeup, which I get, and cinematography.
Ooh. Well, I guess that's mostly lighting, right?
Because they had to make sure that neither one of them would look quote-unquote better than the other one.
This is Vin Diesel versus The Rock, baby.
Oh, that's the feud that I want. So Davis came up with the idea for Jane's look, and this was a big deal. So she did this. Like she was used to playing the non-glamorous roles, so she was like, I'm going to really commit to the character. Apparently, she tried to get a makeup artist to do this for her, and he told her, I'm afraid if I do this to you, I will never work in this industry again. So she did her own makeup every day.
Yeah. The clown pancake makeup is a whole look.
But she's insane.
Sure, yeah.
She also wore a blonde wig that had been borrowed from the MGM wardrobe department that, coincidentally, had been worn by Crawford in one of her early films, though apparently Davis did not know that. That is a revision that the Feud TV show does. They basically tell her, oh yeah, Joan Crawford wore that when she was a lot younger, and she just goes, and grabs the wig. So when Crawford, though, was shown the designs for the dresses she was supposed to wear in Baby Jane, she resisted because she wanted to look more glamorous, wearing her own low-cut negligees and dressing gowns. But Norma Koch, who was the costume designer and would win the film's only Oscar out of 5 nominations, convinced Crawford that her character, an invalid and a recluse, would not wear glamorous costumes, so Crawford eventually agreed to wear frumpy clothes.
Joan, we're saying no. Joan, we're saying it again.
Well, and so here's the thing. So she's, again, during the press stuff, they kind of get jabs off at each other. They are mostly professional during this and trying to feign a camaraderie. But nevertheless, Crawford is on record as saying, Miss Davis was always partial to covering up her face in motion pictures. She called it art. Others might call it camouflage, a cover-up for the absence of any real beauty.
Ugh.
But then also, at one point, Crawford complained about how old she looked in the film, and so Davis, frustrated and fed up, said, fine, we can swap roles, to which Crawford replied, I can't play her. She's twice as ugly.
God.
So there's stories about, things happening between them on set, and they were, very professional, as I said. The only thing that really affected the production of the film, which increased the budget by $60,000, and it was after the final scene of the film was shot on the beach. Crawford called Aldrich to tell him that the final shots in the picture did not match. It was apparent that Davis's lighting was better than hers, and she insisted that her big dying scene be redone. But they couldn't bring 60 people back to the beach, so a set had to be built at the studio, and they had tons of sand brought in. Again, $60,000 added to the budget, and for that, Warner Brothers took away some of Aldrich's profit. So on Wednesday, September 12th, 1962, after 36 days, 6 weeks of shooting, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane was finished with a final budget of $980,000.
Probably pricey for that day and age. Well, pricey for what it is.
Yes. Actually, no. Given the people involved, it actually was a relatively cheap film. I think the single setting helped it, but also the fact that Davis and Crawford agreed to take salary cuts.
Right. Okay.
But when filming was complete, Aldrich was asked by Warner to do because again, they finished filming September 12th. This movie opens November 3rd. So they had to do a very fast edit. You see, the studio had signed a deal with the Theater Owners of America. A new exhibition concept was about to go into effect, and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane was chosen as the first movie to inaugurate the new showcase premiere. Basically, this means that instead of booking the film in first-run city theaters, Warner's would open it in 400 neighborhood theaters throughout the country. And so to meet the November release date, the film had to be edited and scored in 30 days.
Woof.
That's a long time. That's not a long time. So, no one expected this movie to be any good. The general consensus was that these two aging stars had flushed their careers down the toilet shooting a shitty B-movie. So when production wrapped and no new scripts were coming in for her, Davis even placed a classified ad in Variety in September of '62 under the heading of Situations Wanted, Women Artist. And it read, Mother of 3, 10, 11, and 15, divorcee, American, 30 years experience as an actress in motion pictures, mobile still, and more affable than rumor would have it, once steady employment in Hollywood, and then in a parenthetical, has had Broadway. She claimed this was a joke.
Girl, no, it was not.
So the first preview was held on October 20th, 1962, and the audience loved it. It was a shock to most people involved. 2 weeks later, the film opened nationally on November 3rd of 1962 and was a huge surprise hit, grossing $9 million domestically against the less than $1 million budget. And adjusted for inflation, we're looking at about a $72 million domestic gross.
Right. For actresses who are past their prime, quote unquote.
Exactly. On its initial release, people were shocked that these two established stars, together for the first time ever, were abusing the hell out of each other, but also moving an audience at the same time. Reviews were mostly positive as well, though some critics in their reviews did pit the actresses against each other, saying, oh, Crawford's really elegant, Davis is trashy. Oh, Davis is so brave and unhinged, Crawford is boring and bland.
Right.
But we're looking at a 92% on Rotten Tomatoes with an average score of 7.9 out of 10, and Letterboxd users have given this an 8.2 out of 10. And this is where we get to the final kind of fuck you of the feud. Well, I'm sorry, not the final. It will continue going on. But in the wake of the film's success, both Crawford and Davis were campaigning for Oscars with Warner on both their sides. Davis got the Best Actress nomination. Crawford did not get nominated at all. And this is a direct quote from Davis. When Miss Crawford wasn't nominated, she immediately got herself booked on the Oscar show to present the Best Director award. Then she flew to New York and deliberately campaigned against me. She told other people not to vote for me. She also called up the other nominees, specifically Anne Bancroft, who was nominated for her role in The Miracle Worker, and told them that she would accept their statue if they couldn't show up at the ceremony. Anne Bancroft was in a play and refused to leave to go to the Oscars, so she was not there. So the night of the Oscars, Bette was ready to win the Oscar. She was attending with her friend, Olivia de Havilland, which she would co-star with later in Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. But she was literally waiting in the wings, ready to walk on the stage when they announced her name. Yeah. Anne Bancroft's name gets announced, and Joan Crawford, who is standing right behind Bette Davis in the wings, walks past her and goes to accept the Oscar on Anne Bancroft's behalf.
Boo.
Wow.
Bette Davis never got over this. And again, that's really it about the film. But as Joe, you said, like, this did inspire a huge wave of hagsploitation, psycho Bette films. Right after this, Joan Crawford would do the William Castle film Straight Jacket, which is a hoot. Bette Davis would do the twin thriller Dead Ringer.
Right.
They were both meant to reunite in 1964 with Robert Aldrich, actually, for the film Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, which was originally called Whatever Happened to Cousin Charlotte.
Right.
Davis made them change the name.
Fair. It's a good call. Good call.
But Davis locked herself into a producer's credit and was kind of becoming co-director on the film, and so Crawford felt iced out. So she came under the affliction of a mysterious respiratory illness and halted production for weeks. And at a certain point, the studio was like, we're going to sue you, Miss Crawford. And they basically fired her, and they had to replace her with Olivia de Havilland. So, yeah, that's that.
Yeah, we never got the reunion we were owed.
And it sucks because I actually did watch Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte this week in preparation for this. It's not as strong as Baby Jane, but I would argue Davis is more unhinged, and the roles are reversed, where it's like Joan Crawford would have been the villain of the film.
Oh.
And there are so many twists in the final 15 minutes that make it feel more modern than it actually is, that I would actually wholeheartedly recommend Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte.
Huh.
Okay.
Out of curiosity, Trace, does Olivia de Havilland maintain a presence? Because, I know that you said some people feel like Joan Crawford doesn't hold her own against Bette Davis here, but how does de Havilland do?
Well, and that's the interesting thing, because the Charlotte role that Davis plays in that film is like Baby Jane. She's a spinster. She's kind of gone crazy, blah, blah, blah. Olivia de Havilland, or what would have been the Joan Crawford role, is playing her more composed cousin, but she's an icy bitch instead of an outright mental nutcase. And so it would have been more fun. She would have had more to play off of. But again, it's one of those things where she becomes more villainous as things get revealed towards the end of the film. And so she gets a lot to do in those last 20 minutes.
Right. While
trying to play things close to the vest for the first hour and 45, because that movie is also 2 hours and 10 minutes long.
No. I will say that's my number one critique of this film. It is too long.
It's bloated. I will agree it's bloated, but honestly, by the end of it, I don't even care.
Yeah. It's a lot going on, but I did appreciate what they did, the extra elements that they added in. Even though people don't talk about the extra elements all the time when they bring up this film, but I did appreciate it.
Well, that's the thing. Because when you were a kid, Tyrone, were you aware of who Bette Davis or Joan Crawford were, or were you brought in by the actual story of the film?
I was brought in by the actual story of the film. I've seen episodes of The Simpsons or whatever. They have a Bette Davis type character, on there or something like that. But as far as me watching her films, no.
I was the exact same way. And there was something, look, Bette Davis's look in this film is so fucking striking. It's hard to look away from her.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, well, let's talk, because we have 2 prologues to get through before we even get to the movie proper.
This is true, yeah. So the film opens in 1917 at the sold-out performance of young baby Jane Hudson, who is played by Julie Allred. And for the finale of this vaudeville show, she is requested to perform I've Written a Letter to Daddy. And I must say, this is giving me somewhere between Shirley Temple and John Benet Ramsey vibes.
Shirley Temple I might get. I don't think I would understand them referencing John Benet Ramsey in 1962.
Oh, definitely not in 1962, but it's got that pageanty feel where you can tell that the child has been groomed by the overbearing parents. Yes. And they're like, you're going to be a big fucking star. Lo and behold, we bring out this fucking doll that looks exactly like you.
Which is creepy as hell. It reminded me, that whole scene when she was on stage reminded me of a Twilight Zone episode. Well, there was a couple scenes that reminded me of the Twilight Zone.
Well, it's vaudeville. Because admittedly, I am not familiar with vaudeville acts, but it seems to just be a talent show.
Kind of. It's basically cinema without the cameras, right? So it's like live theater, but you can get a variety of different types of performances. So you might get singing, you might get tap, you might get a band of some kind, maybe a little bit of kind of theatrical, that kind of stuff. But the whole point of it was people come in for cheap entertainment and then you would take it on the road.
I think something that struck me about this, because again, the whole concept of the Jane and Blanche rivalry is, Jane lost fame when vaudeville went out of vogue, and then Blanche started getting into film. Obviously, vaudeville is not a thing anymore, but it's so relevant to like the world of today, right? Because we're going through like, film. Imagine how like where TV was 30 years ago, and now it's prestige.
Right. Yeah. Or streamers versus conventional network TV, something like that.
Eventually, we'll just have full holograms instead of screens.
Oh my God. Some would say we're already there, depending on which area of entertainment you're involved in. Yeah. So we do have a dark-haired older sister named Blanche, who in the early scenes is played by Gina Gillespie, and she's very clearly kind of jealous of Jane's notoriety and fame, but Jane is also a diva fucking princess. She wants ice cream, she does not want to take a nap, and she's not afraid to throw a very public temper tantrum about it.
This bitch is a cunt. She's a cunt.
I mean, here's the thing. She's entitled, right? Because she's been told she is a star and all these people are here to see her. So, of course, she's going to act out when she doesn't get what she wants. Mm-hmm. So the important takeaway before we transition to the next time is her mother, Cora, who is played by Ann Barton, says, when you become famous, you have to remember to be kind to Jane and your father. Basically, the mom is saying, don't worry, baby, you're going to be a star, and they're probably not.
Don't be a cunt like your cunt sister.
Yes, Trace. So we jump ahead to 1935, and we are watching a movie. So we're on the studio lot with executive Ben Golden, who is played by Bert Freed, and he is critiquing an adult Jane, who is now played by Bette Davis, and she's giving frankly, I didn't think the performance was that bad. I wondered if I was just missing something, because I was like, okay, well, she's not as good as what we see of Blanche when we're watching the movie on TV later. But like, I don't know, Jane didn't seem terrible.
So the movies that we are seeing in this are actual Bette Davis films from the 30s, from two films that she hated.
Oh, okay.
And this is going to be from films called Parachute Jumper and Ex-Lady.
Also, those titles.
They were two of her least favorite films she ever did, and that's why she said that we should use those to show how bad Jane is.
That's kind of funny, right? Like, that's self-aware, that's willing to take the piss out of yourself, so...
Well, that's the thing. I went back and I watched some even interviews with Bette Davis in like the 70s and 80s when she was kind of like in the end of her career. Although she kept working up until like the year before her death. Like she didn't stop. Whereas Joan Crawford kind of became a recluse because she didn't want to look ugly in public. Right. She's so candid. I mean, like, you read about all these stories about her being a huge bitch behind the set and being demanding, and it reeks of sexism. Like, woman asks for something, therefore she's a bitch. Like, that's how it reads. But she's such a I would highly recommend just going to watch interviews with her because she's so funny.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, the reputation that Jane has on the lot is that she is a drunk and she is a pain to work with. And the only reason she's getting any work is because Blanche continues to demand that she get work in her contract.
And let's make like certain here, we haven't even seen present day Jane or Blanche yet. It takes 18 minutes of this movie before we even see one of them.
Yeah, and before we can get there, we have to see... This was a bit of a revelation as a first-time viewer of this film. The way that this car accident is shot in kind of like fragmented, almost like fetishistic style, right? Where we're not really seeing people or faces. We're just seeing feet pressing against an accelerator and the car smashing against this gate and stuff. It was really stylish.
I'm actually curious, Tyrone, the first time you saw this, do you remember? Because the reveal at the end, where I'm spoil this now for everyone, but is that Blanche is the one driving the car. She's the one who crippled herself, and she framed Jane for it, basically, because she was drunk.
Right.
When you saw this the first time, Tyrone, did you kind of see the wheels turning where you were like, well, why aren't we seeing their faces?
You know what? When I first saw it, I was not even thinking about that. Like, I was just like, whoa, what's going on? Like it was, it was very like, because, I guess beforehand they were talking about the little rumors and things that were going on between the sisters and things like that. And then you just, bam, we're hit with a car accident. And I'm just like, what's going on? And then, knowing a little bit of what I know about, the film, I just assumed, I'm like, okay, Jane must have did it. I was in belief. So when it finally was revealed, I was like, no, that was like a Twilight Zone episode for me. And that's where, like, what I talk about, like, when I say, like, this brings up a lot of emotions, because, like, in that moment, I felt for Jane, more than I had felt for her, throughout the whole entire movie. I was like, damn it. Even when she said, you weren't always this ugly, and it just like I almost got a little emotional, when that happened. 'Cause I was like, damn, this is deeper than I thought. I didn't know I was going to get this deep, but I'm soaked.
Well, so Joe, with your 2023 brain watching this for the first time, were you kind of like, I see what you're doing, Mr. Aldrich?
I wasn't sure that that's what I was seeing, but I definitely took notice of the fact that we were deliberately not showing faces. So I thought, okay, there's something here, but then the movie's also long, so you kind of forget about it. Like Tyrone says, you know that it's Joan Crawford who's in the wheelchair because you've seen the trailer, the publicity stills, you know the film. So I think our mind is deliberately led to that conclusion. But when you think back on it, it's very deliberately staged this way so that we can have this twist at the end.
100%. Yeah.
It's smart. I liked it a lot. I thought it was clever.
Yeah.
Okay, so we get the credits, and then this is the weirdest part of the movie to me. The final time card that we get is yesterday.
The movie's timeless, Joe. It happened yesterday.
Well, I read this interesting piece, which I'm not really going to reference because it didn't end up being super useful, but they were talking about how this movie toggles the line between camp and decadence, and how there's like a different time period associated with that. Like, camp is very retconning the past and kind of looking forward to the future, whereas decadence is about situating something and then feeling bad about the future, like it doesn't look promising moving forward. And I thought it was an interesting piece to bring into this particular time card, because it's like, it feels like it's the present, like we've jumped ahead, but also we're being told this is yesterday, so it's technically a flashback.
They could have just put 1962.
Exactly, yeah. All right, so our introduction to yesterday is neither one of these sisters. It is Mrs. Bates, who is played by Anna Lee, and she comes home to find her daughter, Liza, who is played by B.D. Merrill, and she is watching an old Blanche Hudson film on the TV, because we will quickly come to learn that Blanche's career is undergoing something of a renaissance, because we're now screening old movies on TV.
And this film is Joan Crawford's 1934 film Sadie McKee, which I believe she also didn't like. You will notice too that whenever is it Liza is the teenage girl?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, she's B.D. Merrill. She's Bette Davis's daughter. You will notice that for most of her lines, she is not on screen.
I was going to say, she is not a good actress.
She is a bad actress. And they do poke fun at this in Feud. She's played by Kiernan Shipka.
Oh,
and
ouch.
They couldn't use any of her footage because she delivers her lines so woodenly. And so, but basically, you just have the reaction shots of her mom character as her lines are just dubbed on screen.
Oof,
Wow.
oof.
Yeah.
So we learn that the Bates are neighbors to the Hudson sisters, but that Blanche is never seen, only Jane. So we then cut to see Blanche, who is now, of course, played by Joan Crawford. She is watching that same film, only she's in a wheelchair. And meanwhile, her sister Jane is quite drunk and quite prone to lashing out, being very insulting. And all of this upsets Blanche's bird.
I love, because we don't get like a grand entrance for either one of them, right? The movie just kind of like, okay, here you go. Here's a scene. Here's Joan Crawford. Here's Bette Davis. They're not getting any like, it's not like a big moment, but it's also shocking just to see Bette Davis in this look. I mean, obviously they're both in their 50s by this point, but I would love to know what it was like to be a fly on the wall in those theaters in the 60s when you just see Bette Davis with this particular look on her face.
I was terrified. I mean, I wasn't even alive in the 60s, but I was terrified.
It's somewhere between like clown mime and just over the top vanity, right?
Well, I've seen some people describe her as an ancient drag queen.
Sure. Yeah. Could see it. So we will see Jane in this makeup the entire movie. Like, this is her day-to-day makeup regimen because she is constantly ready for her big comeback, right? Like, she is stage ready to be called to set. So she will look like this for the entire film. And yeah, it's a little off-putting.
I'm curious, because this film could have been filmed in color. I mean, they had the capability to, although I imagine that probably would have increased the budget.
Right. And you can watch a colorized version of it, and it doesn't work as well.
That's what I was kind of wondering. I actually think this works better in black and white than it does in color.
Oh yeah, it does. I think it brings a certain mood. You know, like says Bette Davis, she opposed. You know, they wanted it in color, but she opposed it. You know, saying it would make a sad story look pretty. You know,
You know what? We're laughing, but that is very astute. I fully agree. The other thing that I think is really important is that this movie is coming 2 years after Psycho. And I do think that you can feel a little bit of a shimmer of the Psycho effect in this film.
Well, that's what, because even Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte's in black and white too, and that's 1964.
Yeah, see, that's very much like, it's the sequel.
Yeah. What were you saying, Tyrone? I'm sorry.
No, it's just something about that black and white look, you know, especially when you're telling this type of story. And you've got the music and, you know, the mood and the actors, and it's just a look. It's a certain look.
Well, you know, in a lot of black and white films, especially ones we've discussed, I feel like they play with shadows a lot. There isn't a lot of shadow play in this movie because we're staying in this single location house. But the way Aldrich frames a lot of these shots, like there's a couple of like stellar shots in this film. Even like, well, I'll save it until we get to them. But there are masterful shots in this film.
Well, I would gently push back against you, Trace, because I do think that there's a very deliberate intention to light the exterior shots quite a bit more brightly, whereas when we're inside the house, which you're right, is most of the time, it's quite a bit darker and grimmer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so in the morning, Miss Bates delivers flowers for Blanche because she was so impressed by this film. She forgot how much she loved it, blah, blah, blah. And she can't get past the door because Jane will not let her in. And apparently, this is what Jane says to people. Oh, Blanche isn't fit for visitors. So we then have Blanche incessantly using this buzzer, which is the only way that she can really get Jane's attention because she is trapped on the second floor, and this is not a handicap accessible house.
You and this buzzer, you are so annoyed by this fucking buzzer.
Yes, I may have messaged Trace and said, you know, I get that Jane is a little bit of a loony. She has definitely lost her mind. She is mentally ill. But also, I didn't always get the feeling that Blanche is doing herself any favors by just laying on this fucking buzzer for like minutes at a time.
That's the thing, though. Like, Crawford, yes, is noticeably more... Like, she's not the showboat in this movie, which really makes me surprised that she wanted Bette Davis to play Jane. But I do think that's part of her vanity, where she didn't want to be the quote-unquote ugly sister.
Right.
That being said, though, I think that Crawford really nails a lot of these quieter moments.
I did see that in some reviews where people felt the need to come to Crawford's defense, and they said she's doing a lot more kind of low-key face acting, right? Because she doesn't get the showy moments, and she also doesn't get to use her legs, right? So really, she's just serving face. So it's all about how she reacts. And I think particularly as the starvation stuff kicks in, you can see a lot more of that controlled anger and sadness and frustration.
Yeah.
Okay, so the two sisters are not getting along. It's very obvious that Jane... she takes advantage of the fact that she can move around the house and Blanche can't. And she is very clearly unhappy with the fact that Blanche is suddenly getting more popular and people are starting to remember her because, of course, Jane was in the movies as well, but obviously they were not well-remembered films. So we do get some fighting about, oh, well, Jane's movies were not being distributed in North America.
Well, and that's why they're not also being shown on TV. So on top of the fact that, we have this house selling thing going on, which, by the way, there's not a bedroom on the first floor of that house.
Mm-hmm. You couldn't have refit it like you would when you have an elderly parent who needs to come and live with you, where you're like, right. Okay, this living room has got to go.
Right. But yeah, I digress.
Jane has clearly decided she would rather strand her sister on the second story.
Oh, Jane's got a good life going, man. I mean, honestly, if I were crazy, I'd probably do the same thing.
That's very sympathetic of you.
My sister understands.
Whatever happened to Haley? Okay, so there is another character who is very much on Blanche's side, and that would be cleaner Elvira. She is played by Maddie Norman. Yeah, folks, we're just going to acknowledge right off the top, we've got a black character who comes in, and basically her purpose is to be super supportive of this white lady and then get murdered for it.
Yeah.
It is 1962.
It's 1962. Yeah.
I'm not excusing it, but also, I mean, it's
contextual.
Yeah. But I don't know. I don't really. Maybe I'll disagree. I think that the Elvira character, for the screen time she does have, I like her, but I don't ever think that the film is really, outside of her murder, is really demeaning towards this character. And no one in the film is against her because of the color of her skin. Even when Jane is rude to her, none of it has to do with the color of her skin.
Well, yeah, I would agree. From her character and from what I've seen, I think they could have elaborated a little bit more, but then we would have had to cut other scenes out of the movie because this movie is already hefty. As it is. So.
15 more minutes of Elvira scenes, please.
Yeah, I mean, the trouble is that ultimately Elvira is here mostly to advance the narrative. But yeah. I think you're right, Trace. I think that Norman is doing a good enough job that when Elvira shows up, we don't want her to be murdered. We want her to rescue Blanche. Sometimes we wish that she had more agency or more gumption to say oh, I'm going to have to fight back against Jane. But the reality is this woman is also her co-employer. She may not get along well with Jane, but Jane technically is the one who's cutting the checks.
Well, that's the thing. I feel like, maybe because we're not seeing explicit racism in the film, but it also is a thing where it's if you have a black maid who is talking back against her formerly famous white employer, that's not going to be good for this character. So I understand why Elvira doesn't speak up more in this film.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so what she does is kind of gentle subterfuge. She tries to encourage Blanche to say, oh, you should talk to your sister. You should get your sister some help. Also, we should make some plans. If you're truly going to sell this house so that you can maybe get around and have a fucking life, let's make that happen. And I do like that, Elvira is in on this plan. She is the person that Blanche has felt comfortable confiding in.
Yeah.
So, yes, we discovered that Blanche has been going through the mail and opening up private fan mail as well as other items, which is something that Blanche did not know was happening. And they are also planning to sell this house in 6 weeks. So Blanche kind of needs to tell Jane that something's going on, and it would be best if she didn't hear it from her doctor. So we do hear that Jane is actually seeing a doctor. We don't know how often. They will never interact in person. They will only ever talk on the phone.
Yeah. Well, I was like, we just see him in person, but yeah, I guess he never he tries to come to the house, but Jane stops that pretty quickly.
Oh boy, that was actually my most frustrating point of this film, where I was just like, what kind of doctor are you that someone calls you in a frantic panic and then calls you 2 minutes later, sounds a little different, and says, no, it's fine, you don't need to come anymore. Bad doctor.
A man doctor in the 60s.
There we go, yeah. Honestly, he reminded me of the doctors from the Val Lewton films.
Ooh, that is correct. Yes, I would agree with that. I mean, nevertheless, it's sexist doctors. They're like, oh, crazy lady.
For sure.
Especially at that time. They were throwing women in hospitals.
Yes, they were. All right, so we're back to the bird stuff. This is where Jane reveals that when she went to clean the bird cage, the bird flew away. Sure, Jane. Sure it did.
Well, Chekhov's dead bird. Missing bird.
100%.
I do love, too, that we have... Because earlier, whenever Jane brings the flowers to Blanche, and Jane's like, oh, like she was watching this movie of yours, and she's like, oh, did she like it? And then we have Bette Davis do a mimicry of Joan Crawford's voice, and that will, of course, play a part later. But unfortunately, my entire life, I thought that was actually Bette Davis doing this mimicry. She's not. She is being dubbed by Joan Crawford.
Oh, wow. Damn.
Yeah.
Now I gotta rewatch that part.
She does it like 4 times in this movie, but yeah, it's and that's a line Bette Davis has where she was like, yeah, Crawford was really happy about that.
Yeah, I bet she was. So that's actually where we're up to at this point. So Blanche realizes that she is out of booze, because let's not forget, she has been a heavy drinker. So she impersonates her sister to make sure that the supply keeps coming. And then she leaves the phone off the hook so that Blanche can't use it to call anyone. Not that she could, since technically the phone is only available on the first floor.
Also, I love that we have, like, Drizzly in 1962. They can just call and order booze and have it delivered.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
It's the modern convenience of the 60s.
But yeah, they're ahead of their time, because it's trash now. It's trash now.
Buying booze is trash.
Oh my God. It was a culture shock for me, especially moving from the West Coast to the East Coast. Trash.
Wait, how old are you, Tyrone?
34.
Oh, okay. The way you said that, it made it sound like you had like just turned 21 recently.
Well, yeah, like growing up in, Sacramento, California, and it being readily available everywhere. Then I go to the East Coast and I'm like, can I get some alcohol? They're like, oh, aisle 17, and it's rubbing alcohol. And I'm like, I want drinking alcohol people. They're like, oh, you got to go to the state store. I'm like, what the hell is a state store?
Oh, wait. That's funny because in Texas, they don't serve liquor liquor stores are closed on Sundays, but you can still buy beer and wine at the grocery store after noon, but before 9 on Sundays. But I moved to Colorado recently, and literally they only serve beer in grocery stores. You have to go to a liquor store to get wine, and this is gonna be bad. I don't always vote in the midterm elections. But I absolutely did this year because one of the items on the ballot was, do we sell wine in grocery stores again?
The important things coming into play.
Yes, the issues. The real issues here.
The ones that affect the people.
Yes.
Okay. So I gathered one of the most infamous scenes of the film. We see Jane drunkenly recreating this vaudeville performance from her childhood, and then she sees herself in the mirror and she screams. Okay,
what do y'all make of this? Because in my mind, and this is how I interpret it, Jane still views herself as a 10-year-old girl. So when she does this performance and she steps into the light, actually, this is when the black and white and like the shadows kind of come into play in this particular scene. Mm-hmm. But when she steps into the light, she sees her real face. And for a brief moment, she sees that real face and it scares the shit out of her. And then she, goes back in her 10-year-old self.
Yeah. Yeah. She's definitely got this stunted growth kind of thing. I'm going to bring in my sort of one and only real reference for this episode. It's Patrick Woodstock for a piece called Glamour and Decay, Hollywood Babylon, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and the Aesthetics of Queer Decadence on Film. And Woodstock says, Jane's experience of alienation at her own image resonates with a long history of queer shame and isolation. And I thought that was interesting because, Trace, you and I have previously talked about how this is very like a queer canonical text,
right? Even
though there's nothing explicitly queer about it. It's directed by a straight man. It's got these two queer icons for sure. But then this particular moment, that sense of isolation and alienation from yourself and then having to be confronted with it, I thought that was an interesting queer perspective to bring into this.
I didn't even consider that, to be honest, but I think that's a really, really interesting read. I mean, it definitely plays a factor as the film continues.
Right. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I looked at that part, and earlier when I had mentioned some parts remind me of like the Twilight Zone. There was this episode, and I forget the name of the title of the episode, but it was about this actress, and she used to be big. She used to be all over the movies, but now she would just spend the rest of her days just sitting in the dark watching her old films, and her maid would come in and be like, oh, you got to go out and get some sun. And she's like, oh no, I'm staying inside. I'm just looking at my films. Remember when I was in this and I was hanging out with this guy and I was, the cat's pajamas and all this. And then, at the end, in Twilight Zone fashion, she ends up walking into the screen.
Of course. Right. Well, I guess so even like tying that back to that reading you pulled, Joe, it's like, I feel like I'm linking this specifically to queer men, gay men. There's such a fear of age because we're all very body conscious is the most polite way I will put this. And so I don't know, like I'm 34, Joe, you're older than that. And
how polite of you. Yes, I am.
But I mean, like, in my life, I am starting to have those moments of, oh my God, are my best days behind me? Oh my God, I could die tomorrow, and what have I done? Like, blah, blah, blah. And then I have a reality check, and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm 34 years old. Like, it's not the end of the world. It's fine. But I relate to both Jane and Blanche, so I guess more so Jane specifically, in this kind of way. And I think that's where the real life aspects of Davis and Crawford's, like the sexism and the ageism they're dealing with in the industry, really play a part into the roles they are playing in this film. But I also feel like I just connect with them on a deeper level than that.
Like, this is very much a story about the classical Hollywood system that we talked about earlier, like the studio system and how it kind of kicks older actresses to the curb. And you can see that both of these actresses are putting a lot of their real life experiences and fears into their performances. But it's also not a specifically actor or Hollywood thing, right? Like, as we see the physical markings of life on our bodies, right? It's something that we have to grapple with. And it's confronting. It's challenging. Sometimes you catch yourself in a bad light, like Jane does here, and you think, holy shit, who the fuck is... Oh my God, that's me.
Well, and they're different. It's like a time thing too, right? Because 55, which is around the age that Crawford and Davis were here, was almost like a death sentence in 1962. Whereas today, it's like 60 is the new 50.
I feel like we should clarify 55 for actresses would be like a death sentence. I don't know that 55 as a general age would have been.
Yes. But, today you can be like Helen Mirren and you can be like in your 60s or 70s and be like famous.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure. Why not? I don't know why I pulled Helen Mirren, but I thought Maggie Smith. That's the one.
Yeah, like
I love that you're only pulling like
60.
white British actresses too.
Okay, well, Tyrone brings up Angela Bassett. Good choice.
Yes. Fantastic choice.
Looking amazing.
Getting Oscar nominated and looking exactly the same as she has for like 25 years. So Jane ends up going upstairs, and this is when Blanche comes clean about the house, and Jane does not react well to this. She does call her a liar and say that she's always been a liar, and then she gives her lunch, and lo and behold, that bird is being served on a platter.
I'm going to tell you right now, my favorite part about both, because we get this and we get the rat later, I really wanted to spend time with Jane as she was slicing up all these tomatoes to make a bed. For these dead animals.
Really need to present it well because I still want to make it appealing.
What are those things called, like the metal dish holders?
Like a platter?
Saucer.
Yeah, but it's like a cloche. CLOCHE. Cloche.
Learned a new word today.
Right?
I was going to say, Tyrone, he's going super waspy on us. I have never in my life used the word cloche.
No, I've never said it either. But what would you call a food cover?
Yeah, I'd say like a serving platter with a lid.
It's not a lid, though. It's not a lid. Oh, also, fun fact, actually, the glass thing that covers the rose in Beauty and the Beast is also called a cloche.
Oh.
Wow.
So it has multiple I mean, it's the same thing. It's just covering something, but so it's like a dome object.
I'm gonna flex that knowledge next time, like I'm watching Beauty and the Beast with someone. I'm gonna be like, yeah, that cloche over that rose.
Lift that cloche, bitch.
You get that rose under that cloche, bitch. Oh boy.
I'm just saying, I want to serve dinner one day and reveal my meal under a cloche.
All right. I feel like that's not a big ask. That should be attainable.
Well, I got to buy a cloche first.
Oh my God.
And a platter.
Stop saying the word cloche.
It's baby last week and actually it should be baby this week because it's baby Jane, but it's cloche this week.
Yeah, surprisingly few babies in this movie, but all right, moving on. So as Jane goes to the paper to place an ad for a pianist, we see Blanche contemplating making a break for the telephone, but she stops. And I just want to give a shout out to a friend of mine, Nicole Goebel. She has a podcast called Bodies of Horror on the Anatomy of a Scream Pod Squad Network. So if you're interested in a disability read of this film, she does actually have an episode on the film from last December. But ooh. I will say, I feel like you can watch this movie, and I'm sure it's not the only one, like there's Rear Window and other movies where people are in wheelchairs, and it's interesting to see how we've updated or modernized or even like twisted this around a little bit for recent films like the Sarah Paulson movie Run.
Oh, right. Terrifying.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
So lo and behold, Blanche does not make that journey just yet. She will do it a little bit later. Instead, she goes the other route where she types out what is tantamount to an SOS note, and then she throws it out the window at Miss Bates, and Jane just happens to stop right in front of it, and she just grabs that paper. So no problem, no fuss.
So I'm curious, I'm going to throw you under the bus a little bit here, but you mentioned to me privately today that you were a little bored for chunks of this movie, and I'm curious to know, is it a lot of this Blanche stuff?
I think it's that a lot of the beats felt familiar and a little bit predictable. Now, I don't know if that's just because I've seen other films that have kind of used some of these tactics, and it's just that Baby Jane did it first, but I hadn't seen it. But I found that when I wasn't getting the kind of histrionics, or when Bette Davis wasn't eating large portions of the set, I was just, the Blanche stuff is a little bit quieter. It's a little less enthralling.
It's interesting. On my rewatch this week, the thing that I know, the movie that kept popping into my head the most was Misery.
Yes.
Yeah.
Except in this version, Annie Wilkes is the main character.
Yes.
I don't know. I'm just curious. I'm just curious. I don't even I won't even disagree with you. I'm not even combating you on this. It's because this movie is 2 hours and 14 minutes long, and it does not need to be more than 2 hours, I would even argue.
Mm-hmm.
But I just found it interesting that was your takeaway on a first-time watch.
Yeah, I can't help but wonder if it was a first-time watch, because even, Tyrone, seeing your excitement when you picked this off the list, I was like, okay, so there's something to this film. And I wonder if it's just like a lot of films. The first time you watch it, you're watching it to try to figure out what's going to happen next. So there were certain parts of it that really landed. Like the end of this movie to me is fucking fantastic.
Yeah, it's great.
But some of this stuff where I was like, oh, okay, so she's going to make a break for that telephone. It's just not happening right now. So now I'm just waiting for it to happen.
Well, and you could argue that some of Blanche's stuff gets redundant because it's just kind of trying the same stuff. It's like, oh, throw a paper to the neighbor, call the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Even with Jane, I would even argue, like once we see her pull the maid's body out with the wheelchair, she has to do the same thing with Jane. And it's like, oh, but we've already seen you do this, so we're just repeating the same thing, but with Blanche.
Mm-hmm.
So I get it.
Yeah. There's something to the kind of like cyclical nature of this film too, right? Like they are trapped in a cycle where they abuse each other. Every day kind of looks the same. Some of their actions feel very repetitive. So I can't help but wonder if some of this is also by design. Like it's meant to almost lull us into this horrible monotony of these sisters trapped in this house together.
Ooh, I do like that. And I'm inclined to agree with you.
Yeah, cut like half of Edwin's scenes. Like I love Edwin, but cut like half of his scenes.
You know what? I will say this, Tyrone. So I took a risk and I watched the 1991 TV movie remake of this film right before we started recording just to see what it was like. And Stars the Redgrave sisters, but it's 90 minutes long, so it's about 40 minutes shorter. They modernize it for the time, so instead of vaudeville, like Jane was a child star of the 60s. But the one change that they do make that I do like is that they change the Edwin character. He's played by John Glover in the remake, and they make him a queer con man who then brings Jane, like the whole, instead of having her revitalize her act, he has her put on a show, but she doesn't realize it's at a gay bar during a drag show where they're basically making fun of her.
Wow.
So it's TV movie. It's cheap. I think it's shot like absolute shit. It's not particularly good, but
really selling it here, Trace.
Again, it's streaming on Tubi if you want to watch it. It's streaming on Tubi if you want to watch it. But nevertheless, that aspect of it, I was like, ooh, like again, give this a bigger budget with a better director. There's something here in a remake. But anyway.
Well, that's fascinating. Why don't we introduce Edwin? Because we're only a couple of scenes away. There's a little bit more fighting between the sisters about the house and the fact that Jane should see a doctor. And then she whips out the note like, haha, bitch, I already knew you were going to say that. I was like, oh, Jane, you so petty, but I love you, girl.
Okay, but I'm sorry, but we are going to miss the Blanche, you aren't ever going to sell this house, and you aren't ever going to leave it either.
Yeah, when she said you aren't ever gonna leave it, I'm like, ooh.
Like, she's threatening your fucking life. At this point, you gotta escalate your game a little bit, Blanche. You gotta get out of here.
She does. She says, you wouldn't do these awful things to me if I weren't still in this chair. And then she goes, but you're, Blanche. You're in that chair.
How come when you say it, it sounds like the sailor character from The Simpsons?
But I will say that line though, when she says, but you are, Blanche, like, because she says, you wouldn't do these things to me if I weren't in this chair. And so we have this whole view from the window. And you see Bette Davis's, like, the wheels in her head are turning because she doesn't at first know exactly what to say. And then she smiles. And it's such a perfect shift for this character. I mean, Bette Davis knew this fucking character and knocked it out of the park.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like the fact that, Trace, you said this film got nominated for 5 Oscars. Bette Davis was one of them. But it only won for the costumes, right?
Correct. Oh, also, though, costumes in a black and white film, because we were differentiating at that point.
Oh.
We had separate awards for costumes and color.
Oh, that is wild. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I feel like you had to know what you were doing when you took on this role. You were like, I'm going to eat the scenery. It's going to be high camp. But also, I mean, I think surprisingly restrained. I went into this thinking she was going to be super fucking over the top. And she is, but only in the right moments.
Well, and so again, if you honestly, we will cover Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte on this podcast because we have to continue the story of this feud. But that is what Bette Davis is in that movie. She is just more like hysterical the entire time. But funnily enough,
exhausting.
Guess how many Oscar nominations that movie got?
0.
7.
What? Oh, okay.
7 Oscar nominations for Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, winning 1.
Costume design in a black and white film.
Best Supporting Actress, Agnes Moorehead, a.k.a. Endora from Bewitched herself. Agnes Moorehead won the Oscar for Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte.
Wild. And here we were complaining about Silence of the Lambs and Get Out being the only horror films to ever win Oscars.
It is wild. Although I will say, though, like, Agnes Moorehead is fantastic in that movie. She plays the maid. The white maid. Wait, the white maid in southern Louisiana.
It's a choice. It's a choice. Maids, in general, it's a choice. Okay. So, we've talked about him. Let's bring him in. So, ladies and gentlemen, financially struggling pianist Mr. Edwin Flagg, played by Victor Buono. And he is a mama's boy. So, he lives with his mom. She has just lost her job, so they are in some financial difficulties of their own. His mom is played by Marjorie Bennett. And so, he sees Jane's ad in the paper, and he thinks, okay, Mom, why don't you impersonate a secretary, get me this job interview, let's settle our financial difficulties.
Also, queer connection, Victor Buono, gay in real life.
Oh, interesting. I appreciate what you're saying, Tyrone, because this does feel like all of a sudden we're introducing this random new character. Why do we need so many scenes with him? Is he really that important to the narrative? This character and where he goes with Jane, I did find very interesting.
Oh yeah, it was very interesting. I guess I felt like I was like, we're back at the table with him and his mom. I'm like, it didn't need to, for me, it didn't necessarily need to be revisited so many times, especially for the runtime.
I agree. I think the scenes with his mom feel a little extraneous. I do think his relationship with Jane is crucial, especially to see how he reacts to her, because when she sings for the first time, like, he says, "Oh, that's good," but you can see in his eyes that he's like, no. Also, though, Victor Bruno, Best Supporting Actor Oscar nomination.
Oh, for this?
For this.
Wow. Okay, because he doesn't have a ton of screen time, but I guess supporting actor and actress, we give a little bit of leeway for that.
So this year of the Oscars, and again, it's because of the Joan Crawford campaigning against Bette Davis, but this is supposedly one of the first times that lobbying for Oscar nominations and winners and losers and stuff was kind of really noted. So again, people like to talk about nowadays, oh, the Oscars don't mean anything. It's all politics. And yes,
true. Yes.
That is 100% true. It doesn't always go to the actual best. Of course, that's subjective. But it's not new. It's been happening since at least this time. And I would also wager since the Oscars inception all those years ago.
Oh, sure. Because even when Bette Davis says, I'm desperate to win my third Oscar, it's like, well, bitch, they don't just fall out of trees and show up on your mantle. There's a bunch of people who will never win a single Oscar.
Yeah, well, back then, though, I mean, I think Oscars are less important now, whereas back then they could not only revitalize your career, but they would also help, because the issue that Bette Davis had outside of just Joan Crawford being a cunt is that she was like, I don't know why Joan Crawford did this, because if I had won, the movie would have made $1 million more, and that would have been more money on Joan's pocket because she had that deal. So she really shot herself in the foot by campaigning against me.
Yeah, but petty can't help being petty.
Exactly. But again, it's pettiness spurred on by a bunch of men.
Oh, sure. Of course. It's society. We love to pit women against each other. Also, it's highly entertaining for us.
Yeah.
Okay. So speaking of pitting women against each other, when Jane fails to deliver breakfast, this is when Blanche begins to accuse her of starving her or making her afraid to eat. So she was afraid to eat the dinner because of the bird. And then because she didn't eat the dinner, Jane was like, well, I'm not bringing you breakfast. Now you get to starve until lunch. This is called gaslighting.
Oh, God, yeah.
Wasted. Especially when she's like, you didn't eat your dinner, so I'm not bringing you your breakfast. I was just like, that's when I started to, because Jane, she was always, off kilts pretty much the whole movie. But during that part, I was like, oh, she's really in trouble. Like, this is not going to go. This is not going to go well.
No. Yeah, this is the point in the film where a shift really occurs in Jane's mind, right? She just has to keep her sister alive so that she can continue using her as a cash cow. But it feels like any sympathy she might have had for her sister has seemingly evaporated.
And I think she, at one point or around that time, I think she was snapped already, but she snapped again because, there was a part when Blanche had mentioned to her, she's like, well, yeah, if I go, did you ever think about, how you would pay for this and, all the money would be gone? And she's like, yeah, I thought about it. And I was just like, oh my God, that was chilling to me. That was chilling to me.
Something you're saying, Tyrone, because there are times in this movie where I'm like, because do y'all ever think there's a time in this movie where Jane is fully 100% sane? I don't even know if I need an answer here, but it's there are times, because she's drinking the whole time. So you could argue that she is drunk for the entire duration of her screen time in this film. Or maybe she's a functioning alcoholic because she seems to be able to go to the bank and cash checks very well.
Yeah, but she's also forgetting things, right? Like, oh,
Yes.
normally you would call if you were going to do this kind of thing. And she's like, Gert, just make it happen.
Yeah, and you can see at the end, like, where it's like, okay, she has clearly, like, lost her mind by this point in the film. But there are other moments in the film where it feels like she does lose her mind completely, but then she needs to pull herself back sometimes. And part of my entertainment watching this film is trying to decipher those layers in Davis's performance to be like, okay, like how gone is Jane at this point in time?
I think she was pretty damn gone, because even at the beach, like when Blanche reveals, what actually happened with the accident, I was expecting her, because a lot of times we see when big reveals like that happen, like the character snaps out of it for, the time being, or for at least that moment from then on in the story. But I feel like she didn't react the way I thought she would.
She didn't have the big reaction.
Yeah, she didn't have that big reaction like, oh my God, like she was... I just felt like she was too far gone. Like,
but that's what makes it so sad, though, because again, her reply, we're talking about the end, but her reply is, all this time we could have been friends. And that's what's so sad, right? Because I feel like a previous version of Jane that we'd seen in this movie would be like, you bitch, and slapped her. But she's sad. That's, again, like, I watch this movie and I'm like, yes, there's horror. Like, yes, there's, like, Grand Guignol stuff going on. But it's just so deeply sad. And I do think that this movie has an empathy towards both of these characters, even Jane.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Which I think is important because we should acknowledge, like, both of these women are disabled, right? Like, Jane is coping with mental illness, probably exasperated by her drinking. Yeah. And then we have the physical disability with Blanche. And they're both trying to cope, but the lines of miscommunication are so strong between these two that's been brought on by this rivalry, which was, of course, very nicely set aflame by their fucking father back when they were children.
A father with no fucking balls.
No. I mean, he's showbiz dad, so.
But like watching this man crumble to his little Shirley Temple daughter in that first scene.
Well, he's got to do it in front of the crowd, though. Like, I think that would have played differently if it had been private.
I just like, okay, Jane, but this is your last ice cream of the week. Like, okay, yeah, sure, fucker.
Good luck with that. No, it isn't. Okay, so after Jane takes the food away, she runs into Elvira and she decides, you know what, I've begun abusing my sister to an even more in-depth degree. So she gives Elvira the day off so that she can feed Blanche a rat. I'm sorry, what is the term, Trace? A
cloche.
A cloche.
A cloche-covered rat on an enormous bed of very thickly sliced tomatoes. When I tell you I wanted to eat them so bad. But the rat scene is what was how I kind of came into this movie, because again, so much of my indoctrination into the horror genre was from my father, but because I couldn't watch R-rated movies, which obviously this one was not, he would tell me about them. And so I remember coming across Baby Jane on TV one day, and instead of like telling me just about the movie in general, he tells me about the rat scene.
Well, this was also the scene that ends up getting talked about a lot in either reviews or sort of historical time capsule pieces around this film, right? Like, this was the moment that audiences were absolutely horrified about.
And isn't that funny, though? Like, this was truly terrifying for audiences in 1962.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's wild. But, you go back and you think, like, as time goes on, we start to get more desensitized to certain things and, to where we got a movie like Men, now. And where I saw, that was the first time I saw like multiple people walk out of a theater during like the last 15 minutes of the movie.
Right.
Oh my God. I want to rent a private screening of William Friedkin's Bug, take you with me, and take it to a bunch of unsuspecting people. But yes, I actually always think about that a lot too, where I'm like, what if Bette Davis and Joan Crawford could watch movies from today? And what would they think about those movies?
I feel like they would walk out of something and just be like, that was a hell of a picture.
Because we're saying picture to describe things. I actually wish we still did that.
We can bring it back. Yes. The three of us, we're going to start right here and right now.
The pictures.
Take me to the pictures. Oh, man. Okay. So I will say I love the scene of Blanche literally spiraling out after this rat, because I just think it's like a very exciting shot to look at.
Well, it's childlike glee. She is so fucking happy that she is...
No, I'm saying Blanche, when she's in the wheelchair and she's just like...
Oh, sorry. God damn it. Sorry, I thought we were moving on. I thought you said Jane. This is one of the shots, though. There's an overhead shot of her in this room as she's spinning around in this wheelchair, and it's so fucking fantastic.
It's great. Yeah.
But then we cut to Jane, and she is laughing and cackling with childlike glee over pulling what she, I think, believes is a prank on her sister.
Yeah, I think we've all felt that glee at one point or another, but it was very demented, coming from Jane.
So I think too, Tyrone, the part of, I don't always know the full timeline of this movie, because we have these two, the bird reveal, the rat reveal, but at a certain point, Blanche is like starving.
She's dying.
Yeah, she's dying because she's gone hungry from not eating. So I'm a little confused as to how many days have gone by after this point in the film.
Mm-hmm.
But nevertheless, I love this whole sequence. Like, this is like, it wouldn't be on my scariest movie moments, but god damn do I love watching these actresses do this shit.
I'm glad I'm not the only one about that, about her going hungry, and dying thing, because I was like, how long has this been? Like 2 days, 2 days in the bed? But I don't know.
And that's the thing, right? Because we never see her go to the bathroom, because I would presume she would be able to get some water, which would help her to stay alive longer. Like, you can survive about a week without food as long as you have water. But then we don't know how much water she's getting, because she's also trapped in this fucking bed for a long portion of the back half.
Oh, once she gets tied up, I was like, that bitch is shit in that bed, like everywhere.
Yeah,
but
100%.
But Joan Crawford is not going to have a movie where they say her character shits herself.
No. It's not Renfield, where we're seeing, like, poop come out of an X-ray.
Go listen to our Renfield episode on Patreon, everybody.
There we go. Okay, so this is when Edwin arrives for his 4 p.m. interview, and it's a meet cute, but it's also super fucking awkward, because Jane wants him to recognize who she is, and he clearly doesn't, but he fakes it because he needs the money, except that she doesn't have any fucking money because she's also bleeding her sister dry. And you're just like, these two are kind of perfect for each other, and also it's really fucked up.
But this is why it's so sad, right? Because Jane, even though she's employing Edwin, like, she still views him as a friend. Or at least she wants Blanche to think he's a friend. And Jane is a villain. She is the villain of this movie. But I feel so bad for her. I mean, like, even though she was a cunt from day one, from the first scene of this film, I just feel so bad for her, because she's been chewed up and spit out by the same industry that Bette Davis was, and Joan Crawford was. And it's just like, even though she does horrible, despicable things, I want her to have this friendship. I want her to have this true, authentic relationship in this movie.
Yeah, she's the Lea Michele of this movie.
Okay, no, I don't want Lea Michele to have a friendship.
No, but it's absolutely true, right? I mean, I think the movie only works because we feel something for Jane. If she was just a hissable villain, this movie would probably be very entertaining, but it wouldn't have the same kind of pathos. It wouldn't work the same way that the two of you have described feeling at the end of the film on the beach.
Imagine Jane on Tinder. Like, that would be
God.
one hell of a date.
Well, hold on to that thought, because I feel like we'll have another remake conversation at the end of this episode.
Fair. So on this first date of theirs, basically Jane is like, yeah, I'm looking to revamp my act. Let me take you through my Letters to Daddy performance. And yeah, as you said, Trace, you can see the kind of panic and the, oh my God, what the fuck have I gotten myself into in Edwin's eyes, but also the money. I need to stay on for the money.
Well, and here's the thing too. So, I mean, like, I almost hate saying when an actor's like, oh, they're doing something so brave, because that implies that they are doing something
unorthodox that no one else would do. Ooh.
Yeah, well, because also Bette Davis was never a singer. She was not known for her singing abilities. And so the reason, and I'm not siding in this feud, but the reason I do like Bette Davis more than Joan Crawford is because if Joan Crawford couldn't sing, I don't think she ever would have sang on camera. Because she didn't want her fans or anyone to see that she was flawed in some shape, way, or form. Whereas Bette Davis reveled in that. And that's what I like about her so much.
It's the vulnerability, right?
Which is funny, considering Joan Crawford got her start playing vulnerable characters. They just were perfect vulnerable characters.
Yeah. Yeah, because you could even say, like, her Academy Award-winning performance in Mildred Pierce, like, that character is perfectly vulnerable. Like, it's engineered to make you feel that. And while she's fantastic in it, it's very much like, I am perfect in all these ways, and it's society that is fucking me over in this film. Exactly.
But I will say there is a cutaway shot to Blanche while Jane is doing this rendition of I've Written a Letter to Daddy.
Yep.
It's so quick, but it's basically Blanche going, what the fuck is happening down there?
Well, that's why she leans on the buzzer so much, because she's like, who was at the door? Who was at the phone? I'm trapped up here all by myself all the time. Someone talk to me.
But even in this conversation, though, like, because they're talking about their parents or whatever, and Jane's like, oh, my daddy was in show business too, maybe you knew him. And he's like, oh, what instruments did he play? Oh, the piano and the banjo.
Oh my God, she's low class.
Edwin's, he just goes, oh.
Yeah, the look on his face when she said the banjo.
The banjo. Well, and then it's like super awkward because he's like, oh, that's like a Native American instrument. And you're just like, oh no, let's move on. Let's not. Let's just say we did and move on.
It's but again, because this is the scene also that plays in, this is so funny, in House of Wax, when they go, the remake, when they go into the movie theater, this is what's showing is Bette Davis's rendition of I've Written a Letter to Daddy. And just so iconic. I mean, she just goes all full force in. Even her manner, she's so expressive with her arms during this scene.
Oh yeah, yeah. She's still got that kind of 10-year-old childhood glee to it, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I believe this is probably the happiest Jane has been in years.
She finally gets to perform for an audience again.
Oh God.
So speaking of moments of panic, this is when Edwin says, yeah, so let's talk about money and when can you get it to me? And you can see the wheels in Jane's head turning like, oh my God, I gotta say something. I gotta keep him hooked on the line, as it were. So they end up settling on some kind of arrangement, but the sum she offers him is ridiculous.
What's the sum?
So she offers him $100 a week, and we see that she has paid Elvira $15 for the day.
Mm-hmm. But Elvira's not there every day, though.
True, which makes me think that maybe she was paying Elvira a little bit more, or she was trying to get her to go away. But like $100 for a week's work in 1962 is cha-ching.
Oh yeah, that's why he agrees to do it. He's like, I don't care that you can't sing for shit. I'll do whatever you want.
And like, he's as much of a liar as she is, because he's saying, you know, the reason I need the money is because I have to let my other students go. I'm so in demand. And
well, he's a drunk.
So like they're both grifting each other. So this is also when we discover, or rather Blanche discovers, that Jane not only has chocolates in her room, so that's one way that she's keeping herself alive throughout all of this, but that Jane has been copying her signature and making large sums of money to costumes and other expenses.
I love this. Have y'all ever tried to forge someone's signature before?
Oh, my parents.
For what?
To get out of school. Joe is sick today.
Yes, that was pretty standard, especially like in middle school. Like we had in-house suspension. You know, you were suspended, but you still had to come to school, which was like crap.
Mm-hmm.
You delinquents.
And your parents had to sign off on it, right?
Yeah.
You're like, no, they do not.
See, the only thing we had to sign off on, I mean, we were in 5th grade, we had to sign off if we failed a test. We had to have our parents sign it. And I had I forged my mom's signature to so many of those things. And I got caught because my mom went to an open house and my mom was like, I've never seen these tests. But my teacher was stupid enough to be like, I thought this looked weird. You know, I thought to call you, but I didn't. And my mom, I remember coming home, I was 11 years old. My mom was like cussing out that teacher, like, that stupid bitch knew that our son was forging my signature and didn't tell me.
Wow, talk about blaming the wrong person in this scenario.
They were in cahoots. It was the cahoots.
So we're all delinquents, that was what we're saying.
Yes.
Pretty much.
Minor delinquents, yeah. Okay, so Jane and Edwin are still gone at this moment, so this is when Blanche tries to make a run for it, but she basically falls down the stairs using the banister so that she can call Dr. Shelby, and unfortunately Jane arrives home before she can finish that call, and we get this really, really awful scene of Jane kicking the shit out of Blanche.
Okay, so couple things. This is when some of Aldrich's cinematography, I think, really sings here.
Mm-hmm.
We have this long shot when Blanche is coming down the stairs, which is awesome. But then when Blanche is on the phone, and we get these extreme close-ups on Crawford's face, which, again, I think this is probably her best scene of the movie. But there's this amazing shot of Blanche in the foreground on the phone, and we just see Jane standing in the hallway like opening in the background. It is so fucking good.
It's horror movie classic, right? Like, oh, bitch, look behind you. Somebody is standing there waiting to murder you.
But we don't get a music stinger. We don't have a piece of score telling us to be scared. It's just like, oh shit, that bitch is right there. Yeah. It's all hearsay, but apparently during this kicking scene, Miss Davis did strike Miss Crawford's head at one point. Some people say it didn't happen. Some people say it did. Mm-hmm. Betty Davis is on record as saying, I barely touched her. Crawford said she had to get 3 stitches in her head. No one knows the actual true story of what happened here.
Right. Whose side are you on?
I don't know. Davis's.
Okay, so after this shit-kicking, Jane is on a fucking roll, so she fires Elvira and asks for the key back, and Elvira is smart enough to say, oh, I don't have it with me right now. So then she uses it to sneak back into the house when Jane is not there, but unfortunately, even as she discovers, oh my god, Blanche has basically been like locked in her room. She's incapacitated on the bed. This is when Jane kills her with a hammer. And I blame Mrs. Bates for this because Mrs. Bates had have known to keep her fucking mouth shut. Elvira might have made it out of there.
There are actually a lot of psycho-isms in this movie, aren't there?
Yeah.
Again, diversion. But do you know what? And so instead of Psycho and Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, we're getting Baby Jane mixed with, take a guess.
Ooh. When is it? 5 years later?
64.
I have no idea.
Diabolique.
Oh.
There's a lot of Diabolique in Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. It is wild.
Okay, you really piqued my interest. Tyrone, have you seen Diabolique?
No, I'm writing that down as well as Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte. Gotta check those out.
Diabolique is great. Has one of the all-time greatest twists in horror movie history. Everyone, please go listen to our episode on that from like 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Joe, I actually think you're going to enjoy Charlotte more, if only because it feels more modern in a way. Even though it's 2 years after this, it doesn't feel like a product of the 60s, if only because it kind of goes places with its twist. And there is actual violence. Like, we get decapitations and arm splittings in that movie.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So...
They lean forward. They lean into the grand finale of it all.
Yeah, because this murder, you know, there's technically, 2 murders in this movie. This is one of them. The other one is when Blanche is effectively left for dead at the beach. Although you could still argue we don't know for sure she's dead because the movie doesn't tell us. So there's this, which is a murder, and it's not exploitative. It's not very graphic. Like, you know exactly what's happening to Elvira, but at the same time, it's not like we're doing close-ups of the hammer hitting the back of her head or anything.
No splashes above. Which is actually really funny, though, because, so, again, we have Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte in 2 years, and that's, you know, we get blood in that movie. But Straight Jacket, the William Castle movie with Joan Crawford,
Mm-hmm.
The whole premise of that movie is like the movie opens and she comes home and finds her husband fucking his mistress, and she takes an axe and decapitates both of them, but doesn't realize that her daughter is awake in the next room and watching everything that happens. And so the movie cuts forward 20 years, and the daughter's grown up and she's getting married, and her mother is just released from the insane asylum.
Of course.
But then murders start happening again.
Right. And who's committing the murders, I wonder.
Well, that's the thing. So that movie is very generic up until the ending, which I think is a fucking fantastic twist ending. Now, granted, if you're alive today, you're probably going to figure it out early on. I figured out part of the twist, but missed the other half of the twist. But nevertheless, you see decapitations, but it's also clearly a dummy's head that gets whacked off.
Yeah. I love it. I love a dummy. Okay, speaking of dummies, Edwin tries to come back. I'm confused because watching this the first time, all of this Edwin stuff was new. I didn't know that this character was present in it because I feel like you never see any hint of him in the trailers, in the marketing promotions, and so on. Do you think that Edwin is actually falling in love with Jane? Because I feel like the initial meeting suggests no, but then I feel like scenes like this suggest, oh, maybe he feels like he's met a kindred spirit.
This is interesting.
You know what? I think it's I did think that at a certain point, I was like, it's a possibility that he's found some sort of connection with her, even outside of the transactionary, relationship that they have. But I do think it was possible. It did cross my mind at some point.
So I actually view Edwin as a gay man. But I say this because, and again, because Joe, you had seen this for the first time. Tyrone, you didn't know this, but I know I'm saying this knowing Victor Buono is a closeted gay man.
Right.
And this is that Feud show coloring my perception. When the actor playing Victor Buono meets Bette Davis, who's Sarandon in that show, they shake hands. And she's like, oh, I was expecting someone. And he goes, less homosexual. And so I got the impression, at least based on that show, which maybe that's unfair to have that color my perception, that was intentional, to have a gay man playing someone who's supposed to be her paramour almost.
Right. Because Jane is so closeted in a way, right, where she's trapped herself in this house with her sister. She's probably pretty inexperienced when it comes to men, and she might not recognize some of the telltale signs, like, oh, this adult man who still lives with his mother.
Well, and that's the other piece, right? He's living with his mother. He is an alcoholic, but maybe I'm filling in the pieces myself here and making a reach, but I view him as being an alcoholic because he's repressing his sexuality.
I didn't think about that.
So
it was the 60s.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Still not a great time for people to be out now.
But I don't think that he necessarily, I don't think Victor Buono hides his flamboyant mannerisms in this movie, which is also why I still view the character of Edwin as queer.
Yeah. One of those things where you can't unsee the actor's real life sexuality. It just kind of bleeds into the character.
But that's why I'm interested in y'all's take, because again, I have too much information possibly clouding my judgment here. Y'all, it doesn't sound like y'all even suspected that this man was a gay man.
But I think it depends on if you have prior knowledge sometimes, because now I watch TV and sometimes I'll know someone is gay in real life, but on the screen, they're playing someone straight, and it's funny to me, sometimes I can catch certain mannerisms, but I'm like, okay, you're playing what the stereotypical, straight guy would say, or how he would move or whatever. So it's,
I think it was, I get what you're saying. And, that obviously brings to the whole, should only gay actors play gay roles debate, but I won't get into that too much. But I think it's more, is glaring the word I want to use, in movies of this time period, because none of these actors could be out.
Right.
Whereas now, you have Matt Bomer playing every fucking role out there in the world, straight, gay, whatever. So I don't know. It's always a thing where it's the movie should do the work for us. So should I read into the fact that Edwin is not explicitly queer in this film? I don't know. But given what I know about it. But again, should what I know about the outside aspects of this production affect how I'm viewing the film itself? I don't know.
I don't think you can divorce yourself from stuff like that so easily. Like, sometimes you know things and it just colors the way that you see them play out on screen. I think you did the right thing by letting Tyrone and I answer first so that you could kind of gauge like, oh, okay, how much of this is informed by the other things I already know.
But that also ties into, then, the rivalry between Davis and Crawford. Does that make the movie better for people who were more embroiled in their rivalry and getting off on it, as opposed to if you knew nothing about this, would this movie be as strong for you?
I think it still works unabashedly because the movie does enough work to establish the conflict between the sisters. But I think if you had an investment in the real life drama, this film would sing to you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, most definitely, because I started watching it. Well, I saw the film before I knew about like the real life drama and everything. It was actually like a double feature. I watched this, then I watched Mommy Dearest afterwards.
Oh,
there you go.
Wow.
Wait, okay. Really funny anecdote though. So as we all know, Faye Dunaway plays Joan Crawford in Mommy Dearest. Bette Davis worked with Faye Dunaway on a television movie in the 70s. And in her memoir, This Is That, from I think 86, she calls Faye Dunaway the most unprofessional, abhorrent actress she has ever worked with.
Oh my God. And then she goes on to play her professional
Joan Crawford!
Wild. Maybe this industry is too small.
That's what I say. Well, that's the thing, because when Bette Davis was starring in that movie with Faye Dunaway, that was the 70s. So Bette Davis was in her 60s, she was in her 60s. And so the fact, like, what kind of, like, kismet, like, synchronicity, like, oh my God, of course she would go on to play Joan Crawford in a movie.
That was wild. Okay, so also wild are the lengths that Jane is going to cover up this here murder. So she won't let Edwin in. She's wheeling poor Elvira's body out using her sister's wheelchair, dumping her in the trunk, dodging Mrs. Bates, who's like, oh, do you have enough flowers? It's like, Jesus fuck, neighbor, get out of here. And meanwhile, Edwin is hearing all about Jane's sordid history from his mother, who has apparently been like, doing the microfiche route down at City Hall or something? Like, oh yeah, that Jane Hudson, she's no good.
Tyrone, you hinted at this. This is the scene I think that could be cut. However, I think the only reason it's in here is to remind us of the car accident, to prime us for the confession at the end of the film.
Yeah.
And it's not necessary because any viewer that is moderately intelligent will remember that. But I do think that's the only reason it's in here.
I think we also need to see Edwin learn it so that he can have this kind of emotional breakdown when he finally goes in. Because, I mean, regardless of which reading you want to believe in, Edwin does end up going back to the house to try to either question Jane or maybe prove to himself that his mother is lying, or just to say, like, maybe I can get some money out of this still. And then when he ends up finding Blanche, it's confirmation, and he stumbles out of the house, down the street, and out of this movie.
Yeah, he's done. Well, yeah.
Yeah, it was strange to me because you see him walking down the street and he's, almost gets hit by a car and he's like, hey, stop. But I'm like, and I know it was the 60s, no cell phones, no things like that,
There were payphones, sir.
Yeah, the payphone or, shout loud. Someone's in trouble, wake somebody up. Like, it's a quiet neighborhood, wake somebody up.
But I think what we're seeing from his reaction, it's quiet, it's not showy, but it's more of what you were expecting from Jane at the end, Tyrone, where he's so flabbergasted by what he has seen. Like, oh my God, this woman has her sister tied up in an upstairs bedroom. He can't process it. I actually thought the movie was going to kill him to keep him quiet here. I was surprised that he doesn't get hit by a car.
The remake kills him.
Oh, okay, well, there we go.
but it's so that's. I mean, look, I truthfully never really put much stock into Edwin every time I watch this movie. But that being said, he and Jane are birds of a feather. They're both alcoholics. They're both like essentially children because he still lives with his mother and she's, the way she is.
They're kind of reclusive.
And if you read him as queer, then he is the queer fan worshiping his diva, Baby Jane. They could have a harmonious relationship, but that's never going to happen.
But also then he's discovered that somebody that he either thought he was making a connection with or that he admired is more flawed than even he thought.
Yes.
So that's got to be crushing.
Mm-hmm. But he's also wasted during this. Oh, also, I'm sorry. I don't just drink vodka and or gin out of a glass with some ice in it.
Straight up, baby.
Admire? ? A lot of the people of the 60s and times before that can just do that.
See, this always felt like movie magic to me. Like whenever I watch stuff and people just, oh, I'm at a party and I'm just pouring myself a glass of vodka, I always think, I'm sure there's some people who do this. I'm sure we will hear from them. But for the most part, I'm like, I need a mix. I'm going to go for beer, maybe some wine, because I'm not just doing glasses of hard alcohol.
Tyrone, can you drink anything neat or on the rocks?
No, I routinely get made fun of for pulling up with my martinis and my I've got to have something fruity.
He's classy.
Some maybe a jalapeno martini,
Nice.
But as far as the because back in the day you watch movies or television and someone's pouring them a glass of scotch. And I just, as a kid, I thought like, oh, scotch, butterscotch. This probably tastes like butterscotch.
Oh my God.
Oh no.
That was not the case at all.
You learned your lesson.
Yeah. All right.
I will say the only whiskey I will drink neat is Basil Hayden's whiskey. And the only alcohol I will drink neat is Basil Hayden's whiskey. The only alcohol I will drink on the rocks is bourbon, whiskey or scotch in general, but it has to be on the rocks. I will only drink Basil Hayden's neat. But I can't just pour vodka into a glass with ice in it and just drink it. I cannot do that.
Oh no, it's definitely a hard sell for me. Like if I'm out with coworkers and they're like, "Oh, we're taking a shot or we're taking a double shot."
Well, a shot's different.
I may do that, but as far as just pouring it in a glass, I'm like, I'm not going to finish this.
Yeah, no. Like when I went to Poland, they're actually infamous for having multiple flavored types of vodka. Mm-hmm. And so doing shots of flavored vodka was very much a thing. But it's not like people were saying, oh, pour me a full-on glass of it.
But I get doing shots of flavored vodka. I'm also not going to, maybe this is just because I'm a whiskey person, but I am never going to just pour a shot of straight vodka and take that. A whiskey shot, sure.
I need my alcohol to taste good, on all levels. I was tricked one year for her birthday. One of my friends, she had me drink Everclear straight. And that was traumatizing.
I used that to make Jello shots my freshman year of college.
Boy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's wrap this movie up, shall we?
Yes.
So, Blanche is basically dying, as we discovered when Edwin came upon her body. So Jane takes her sister out to the car, much like she did with Elvira. We go to the beach so that we can build some sandcastles as the sun comes up. I do love, this movie's not particularly funny in a lot of ways, but there's an ironic comedy to the cops having this Q&A kind of thing about the case and, oh yeah, that crazy Jane Hudson lady, there's an APB out, and she's literally right behind them on the beach with her sister's dying body.
Okay, so you mean intentional comedy, because I'm imagining a lot of people yelling at their car radio right now when you said this movie's not particularly funny.
Yeah, the movie's not trying to make you laugh.
Okay.
Not trying to, but you do get your laughs off.
Well, but this movie is such an interesting, because it is campy, but again, camp is so often interspersed with bad, right, or poor taste, and it's such a weird thing. I see the camp in this film, but I don't think anything, I think everyone in this movie was like, no, we are making a B movie, but we're making a prestige B movie.
Right. If there was such a thing back then, but...
That's what this is.
I guess even when people say, oh, Bette Davis's performance in this is really campy, I don't even entirely agree with this. Tyrone, when you said you watched this and then you watch Mommy Dearest, Mommy Dearest
That's
is camp.
Yeah.
What Bette Davis is doing is, to me, a bit of a multi-layered kind of nuanced performance of a mentally unstable alcoholic. Like, there's a lot more to this performance. I don't just see her, tearing off pieces of the set or having like this really big time with it. Some of the line delivery, sure, could be comedic, but I don't think that that's the intention, which, again, doesn't negate a camp reading, but this doesn't give off a ton of camp to me personally.
I agree with you. And again, I mean, I've said it 1,000 times, but it's really a testament to Davis's performance, because is she over the top? Yes, absolutely.
But it's in keeping with the character.
Yes. And the fact that I still feel something for Jane after everything she has done in this movie. And again, we're here now. Her reaction to Blanche telling her what really happened, and she just...
It's like she shuts down. She becomes the child that we have all been seeing for the entirety of the film.
But as Tyrone hinted at earlier, that her reaction is not one of rage. That it is, you mean all this time we could have been friends. That is such a profoundly sad line of dialogue in this movie. And I don't think when I first saw this, truly expected to like be moved to tears by anything these characters did.
No, it doesn't feel like that kind of movie.
No, and that like because it's funny when Crawford is giving her confession, like the camera stays on Davis for most of her delivery, which is probably due to the fact that Crawford wanted it reshot. But
better lighting.
But I actually think it works better because Davis, watching her react to this as it's delivered to her is so moving. And her makeup is also the most cake on it's been the entire time. And what I love is that after this confession, when she goes to get ice cream, her makeup looks better. Like, she doesn't look like a hag. She looks younger when she goes to get the ice cream. And I actually believe that's because this confession pulled something out of her that made her glow. But I don't know.
It's funny that you say that because I actually thought that they had taken the makeup off.
Interesting.
Maybe.
When I watched that scene, I didn't even think about that. Like, I was just so focused on the ice cream because I'm like, she's dying over there. Like, get her something in her stomach, get her some food.
Maybe a little more urgency, even.
Yeah, I'm like, if she would have made it there? Because I honestly, like, I know a lot of people say she died or whatever, but I'm like, did she? Like, I feel like, they may have got there in the nick of time. Maybe she got some ice cream in her system. Maybe the ice cream saved her,
Well, actually, for both of you, do you think that Blanche dies at the end of this movie? Because, it is left open-ended.
I mean, I thought that she had died a couple of times by this point because she's lying she's pretty static on that there beach. So I probably think that she died, but yeah, I mean, the fact that the movie doesn't confirm it is pretty fascinating.
Tyrone?
Yeah, I don't think that she died. I think that I have this hope that she was saved by the ice cream, especially.
Except she never gets there with the ice cream because all of a sudden Jane has an audience for the first time in forever and she just takes to dancing.
And that's the thing. I'm like, how sick is that your sister's over there dying and you're just prancing around on the beach with a circle of beach bums around you.
I think for the tone of the film, it makes sense that Blanche would die. However, the optimist in my heart is, no, Blanche was saved by the cops and Jane went to the loony bin. But I also love that this movie doesn't end with any kind of resolution. Nope. It just ends with Jane dancing to her audience. And it is... Yeah. And we have this long shot as the cops approach Blanche's body / living husk as the credits roll. And the credits just roll over this. And it feels so ahead of its time. Although, again, cinephiles feel free to disagree with me. Because, I mean, shit, The Birds would come out next year. And that would have an unsatisfactory, like, anticlimactic ending. But this is such a deeply sad ending for this movie, and that's why this movie works for me. I think, and Joe, you hinted at this, but I think this ending like locks in the film for me. Like, where I do agree, it is bloated. I do agree that there are scenes that can be cut. I think it is pacey in parts, but this ending seals the deal for me.
What's interesting that you say, oh, the birds is going to come out. But like, again, I'm thinking of Psycho and that kind of ambiguous, not quite closure driven ending where we're just hanging on Norman Bates' face.
Well, but we don't have a psychiatrist come in that says, well, baby Jane had an experience when she was young and it made her mind split.
Yeah, because this movie's smart enough to say, oh, we already talked about the character psychology earlier. But that is actually one final point I wanted to raise, because I mentioned Nicole Goebel's podcast earlier. And one of the things that she says in that episode that I felt was really intriguing about this ending is how it's a twist, right? That Blanche is actually the one who ended up crippling herself. But I love that if you take a step back from that, that actually means that Blanche has been as much of a villain in this narrative. She wanted to kill her own sister. And sure, it happens so late in the film that we can barely process that before the credits are rolling. But it's a really interesting take on disability where we expect handicapped people to be perfect. Like Trace, we just talked about it last week with JC and Night of the Creeps. Yeah. And it's like, oh, here we've got this character we've been sympathizing for because she's being horribly abused by her sister, but she's actually also a monster and she's disabled. Like, it's actually it's ahead of its time in that capacity.
Do we view, I'm not even fighting you, but do we view Blanche as a monster? I only ask because in her confession, she's like, you were so cruel to me at that party. I hated you so much. And I'm not saying that if you hate someone that it gives you the right to run them over, but
good. That's good.
What I am saying is that I understand both of these characters' motivations so much. Even as spoiled as Jane is, I get it. And even as whatever as Blanche is, like I don't even view her as the villain. They're just sisters that kept fighting.
Well, Tyrone, I'm curious, do you see either one of these as villains or are they just flawed women?
I think they're just flawed women, like at the end of the day. I think in the beginning I did see like Jane as a villain. And then towards the end, I'm like, oh, Blanche. Like it started to unravel for me, like just how flawed Blanche is. But I think at the end, I had sympathy for both of them. I'm just like, yo, this is that's why I call it a fucked up affair. You know, it's just a fucked up affair for me.
And I think that's why, though, I appreciate the audience reaction to this, because here's the thing. With this ending, this is quote-unquote unsatisfactory by modern movie standards.
Oh, okay.
Well, just because. I mean, like there's not really a conclusion here. Like, one of our main characters might be dead. The other one might be, well, she's insane, but she might be going to the loony bin.
She's going to go to Chicago jail, where she's going to be a celebrity.
Yes, there you go. But I'm a little surprised, and maybe this is my naivete, that 1962 audiences walked out of this saying, like, oh yeah, I'm satisfied by that.
I think what ended up happening was the similar reaction that you had, Trace, where it's like, this ending seals the deal. Like, it is so satisfying. I was really on the fence. I was like, yeah, this movie's fine. I can see why people kind of like it. I don't really want to revisit it anytime soon. And then we get to the beach, and it was like, oh, this movie just jumped a full half star.
Good for you. Oh my God, I'm so excited to cover Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte next year.
I don't like this forced programming. I did not consent.
I get 3 movies to program a year. Anyway, okay. Well, that is Whatever Happened to Baby J. We've talked about it a lot, but Tyrone, do you have any final thoughts on this film?
I mean, I highly recommend it to people. Like it's one of those films that I like to show people on a blind watch. It's very moody for me. It's very unsettling. The performances were just top notch for me. I mean, it was a little longer than I would have. I mean, I like watching it, especially like if I'm smoking or whatever. Like, I don't mind it, but like objectively, I'm like, okay, you could cut this out of here. You could cut that out of here. But I think it's definitely a must watch.
Oh yeah.
I'm in agreement with that. I mean, again, I get the complaints about the length, but I think, and Joe, I hope you do revisit this at some point in your life, because I do think that now that you know what it is, you'll be able to appreciate more of the nuances of the film. I mean, not that you don't already. Like, you've already raised plenty of stellar points, but but I think you might appreciate it more in a second watch.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my default assumption is that you can never watch a movie once and appreciate everything it has to offer unless you truly hated it, in which case, like, it's not for me. But this was interesting because I feel like we had talked about programming this film earlier, and I think I took it off the schedule because I just didn't want to cover it. I didn't want to watch it. So this is one of the benefits of having a show where you say, okay, you've got to sit down and watch the movie so that you can have a fulsome conversation with lovely people about it. So I'm happy to have crossed this off because I do think that this is well worth watching. I can officially reinstate my gay card because I've seen a classic. But yeah, I mean, I think it's all about these two women. And it makes me sad to think that this film was such a big hit. And then both of their careers immediately stalled back out. And this is kind of the last big thing that both of them do.
I agree. And I think to me, too, what is sad to me outside of their careers, which, again, Bette Davis did keep working. But, like, yeah, poor Joan Crawford, her career did not bounce back after this. It's also the fact that they didn't mend their relationship after this movie. It got worse.
This should have been the thing where it's like, when we come together, we produce art, and it's a box office hit.
Yes. And when we cover Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte next year, we will go further into why this didn't work.
Okay.
You're gonna. I'm
no,
gonna
it's
laugh
fine. I love this.
You're gonna like it. But anyway, okay. So before we announce what we're covering next week, Tyrone. First of all, thank you for coming to discuss this, and let everyone know, where can they find you on social media?
Oh, well, thank you guys for inviting me. Social media, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, for my interviews with the horror community and horror discussions at The Evil Tyrone. That's at The Evil Tyrone. Evil spelled EVOL. Love backwards.
I'm so glad it's still pronounced evil, because I was like, God, am I going to pronounce it evil? But
And folks should definitely check out the interviews, because you're doing a great job of amplifying people who they're either on their way up or they're like established voices that people should be following if they haven't already. So I've really been enjoying watching your interviews.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, if you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us on Twitter and Instagram at HorrorQueers. Shoot us an email at horrorqueers@gmail.com. Find us on Letterboxd to keep track of all the films we've covered. Go to our YouTube channel to check out our interviews with various horror filmmakers, as well as our monthly horror hangouts where we talk about hot-button issues with some of our journalistic peers. And if you want to chat with other listeners, please join our Facebook Horror Queers group. If you have a moment, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you want even more Horror Queers content, please support the show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/horrorqueers. We are in May, so sign up now and you will get 238 hours of extra content. This month, we're going all in on Evil Dead with an episode on Evil Dead Rise, our thoughts on the entire Evil Dead franchise, and an audio commentary on the original 1981 film. Plus, we will have episodes on Amazon Prime's Queer as Fuck, Rachel Weisz starring Dead Ringer series, and the Lulu Wilson starring The Wrath of Becky. So, that being said, Joe, what are we talking about next week? This is a first-time watch for me.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, so we're not going camping next week. We're going very deadly serious.
No.
Emphasis on the deadly, unfortunate. But we're going to be watching queer director Gus Van Sant's 2003 Columbine film, Elephant.
I will tell you, I live about 15 minutes away from Columbine High School now, and I did not realize that before I started researching this film.
Ooh, wow. Yeah, so it's probably going to be a pretty serious, factual episode, but I'm actually really eager to check this film back out. I saw it when it came out. We're technically doing it because it's celebrating its 20th anniversary coming out of Cannes. And this is a very moody, very difficult watch, but I think it's a very important film.
I'm really, well, maybe excited is the wrong word to say, but I have been wanting to watch this film for a very long time.
Yeah, it should be good.
All right. Well, everyone, until next week, we can cross out whatever happened to Baby Jane.
Indeed, and cross out horror queers.
Atlas Avenue, a long stretch of road that encompasses everything the city of Kennett Heights has to offer. Neon lights, traffic, crime, the hustle and bustle of everyday life, and the craziest of characters. My office was above it all. My name is James Locke, and I'm a PI.
Hello, Mr. J. How the hell you doing today?
Good, Edith. Nearly every year I have a new case. New people to meet, new clues to discover, and new problems to solve. But I do it the old-fashioned way. No technology. Nothing post-1950. Hell, I don't even listen to podcasts, but you should. Atlas Avenue Beat is a spoof of the film noir genre with goofy characters, tons of wordplay, and non-stop raunchy humor. There's also 3 whole seasons out right now with more on the way. Just search for Atlas Avenue Beat wherever you listen to podcasts or visit us online at bloody.fm.